My sister, Sarah, had a way of charming her way into your life, then systematically dismantling it from the inside out. I learned that lesson the hard way, the day she threw my cat, Mittens, out into the unforgiving streets of Chicago. It wasn't just a cat, it was 3 years of companionship, a silent witness to my struggles, and the one constant in a life I'd painstakingly built from scratch. That day, as I stood on my doorstep, Mittens' carrier clutched in my hand, I knew there was no going back. Her bags were already on the curb, a stark declaration of war. She'd been calling, begging for forgiveness, but the line was dead. Not just the phone line, but the one connecting us, sisters by blood, strangers by choice. I grew up in a small, forgotten town in rural Illinois, the kind of place where everyone knows your business and ambition is often seen as a betrayal. But I had bigger dreams than cornfields and Friday night lights. The moment I graduated high school, I packed my meager belongings and headed straight for Chicago, a city that promised anonymity and opportunity. I enrolled in community college, worked 2 jobs to pay tuition, and eventually landed a decent position in a marketing firm. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I had my own apartment, a mortgage I was proud to pay, and a quiet, independent existence. Until Sarah, 2 years my junior, was the wild card. While I was studying for exams, she was sneaking out to parties. While I was saving every penny, she was spending hers on designer knockoffs and concert tickets. After she flunked out of her first year at a state university, a generous gift from our parents, she somehow convinced them to let her try again, this time in Chicago. And of course, to live with me. For 2 months, she buttered me up, promising to be the perfect roommate, a diligent student, and a helpful presence. She'd cook, clean, and even walk Mittens, she swore. All I had to do was tell Mom and Dad I was on board. Foolishly, I agreed. Our parents, ever the optimists, gave Sarah a stern lecture, a pat on the back, and sent her off with a blessing and a warning. For the first few weeks, Sarah was a model tenant. She kept her promises, even occasionally doing the dishes without being asked. But the facade crumbled quickly. Soon, dirty plates piled up in the sink, her laundry overflowed, and late-night parties became a regular occurrence. My quiet sanctuary transformed into a revolving door of strangers and loud music. I tried to talk to her, to reason, to remind her of her promises. It was like talking to a brick wall. Or worse, a brick wall that argued back, accusing me of being uptight and jealous. Our arguments escalated. I'd find myself on the verge of calling our dad, knowing his temper would send Sarah packing back to rural Illinois, her college dreams shattered. The threat of his intervention usually brought her back in line, but only temporarily. My patience, a finite resource, was wearing thin. My personal life, once a quiet comfort, had become non-existent. Bringing a date home felt impossible with Sarah's unpredictable presence. I loved her in theory, but living with her was a constant exercise in self-restraint. There were days I fantasized about hitting her over the head with a frying pan just to get a moment of peace. But the final straw, the one that snapped my last nerve and sent her packing, was Mittens. I'd found him 3 years prior, a scrawny kitten with a broken paw and matted fur, huddled outside a grocery store. I nursed him back to health, and he became my shadow, my furry confidant. He was a sweet, affectionate cat, though he had his mischievous moments. He'd never bitten or scratched, never chewed on plants. His worst offense was occasionally scratching the wallpaper in the bathroom. That was it. From the moment Sarah moved in, Mittens seemed to sense her disruptive energy. He was the undisputed king of my apartment, accustomed to lounging wherever he pleased, even on the kitchen counter when he thought I wasn't looking. But Sarah saw him as an intruder, a furry obstacle to her chaotic existence. She'd shoo him away with a harsh word or a kick, never outright hurting him, but always making her displeasure known. I'd warned her, explicitly, that if she ever laid a hand on my cat, she'd be out. The most she was allowed was a squirt from a water bottle. Mittens, being the intelligent creature he was, quickly learned to retaliate. He'd deliberately nap on her clothes, leaving a generous coating of white fur. Sarah would shriek, but she never dared to strike him, knowing my wrath would be swift and severe. This was the backdrop. The real story began a few weeks ago. I came home from work, tired and ready for my usual greeting from Mittens, but he wasn't there. I called his name, searched every room, my heart beginning to pound with a familiar dread. Sarah was on the couch, calmly painting her nails, oblivious to my growing panic. "Where's Mittens?" I asked, my voice tight with a fear I couldn't quite articulate. She looked up, her expression as placid as a summer lake. "Oh, I put him outside," she said, as if she'd just mentioned taking out the trash. He was lying on my new black sweater, and when I tried to move him, he clawed it. So I tossed him out. My blood ran cold. I didn't even register the rest of her words. "You," I whispered, the words barely escaping my throat. I ran downstairs, calling his name, my voice hoarse with desperation. I searched the hallways, the lobby, even ventured outside into the darkening street, my eyes scanning every shadow, every bush. Nothing. No Mittens. The city, usually a comforting hum, now felt like a gaping maw, ready to swallow my beloved companion whole. Returning to the apartment, a cold, hard resolve settled over me. I walked into Sarah's room, grabbed her suitcase, and began stuffing her clothes, haphazardly, furiously. Every item I touched felt like a betrayal. I dragged the suitcase to the door, then turned to her, my eyes blazing. "Gout," I said, my voice low and steady. She stared at me, shocked. I'd threatened it countless times, but I'd never actually followed through. Until now. I pushed her out the door, her protests echoing in the empty hallway. I slammed the door shut, the sound reverberating through the apartment, a final, definitive end to our shared history. Tears streamed down my face, hot and angry. My mind raced, conjuring horrific images. Mittens hit by a car, attacked by stray dogs, lost and alone in a city he didn't know. Sarah was pounding on the door, screaming threats about calling our parents. But I was already dialing. Our mom, a fellow cat lover, would understand. She had to. I explained everything. The years of frustration, the broken promises, the final unforgivable act. I told her Sarah wouldn't be living with me anymore. Mom, after a moment of stunned silence, gently chided me for throwing her out, but then quickly shifted gears. She'd call her sister, Aunt Carol, a no-nonsense woman who'd spent her career working in a correctional facility. Sarah would be in for a rude awakening. Mom asked me to give Sarah money for a cab to Aunt Carol's. I agreed. Anything to get her out of my sight. The next few hours were a blur of agonizing worry. But then, a miracle. My downstairs neighbors, a sweet elderly couple, had seen Mittens wandering near the building and, recognizing him, had taken him in. He was safe. Sarah, meanwhile, was now under Aunt Carol's strict supervision. I felt a grim satisfaction. Sarah was an adult. She should have known better. But even now, she still didn't get it. She truly believed I'd chosen a cat over her, unable to grasp the simple truth: you treat living beings, even animals, with respect. And she had failed spectacularly. The silence in the apartment after Sarah left was deafening, a stark contrast to the cacophony of her presence. It should have been a relief, a return to the peaceful solitude I craved, but instead it felt hollow. The air still hummed with the ghost of her arguments, the faint scent of her cheap perfume lingering like a bad memory. Mittens, thankfully, was curled up on my lap, purring contentedly, his soft fur a balm to my frayed nerves. But even his presence couldn't entirely quell the gnawing anxiety that had taken root in my stomach. I had done what I swore I would never do. I had chosen a cat over my sister. And while I knew, deep down, it was the right decision, the weight of it pressed down on me. Mom called later that evening, her voice a careful blend of concern and thinly veiled disapproval. Aunt Carol, she reported, had taken Sarah in, but not without a stern lecture about responsibility and consequences. "She's upset, honey," Mom said, her tone softening. "She feels like you abandoned her." I bit back a sarcastic retort. Abandoned her? She had abandoned every shred of decency when she threw my cat out, but I simply mumbled something about needing space and ended the call, too exhausted to argue. Days turned into weeks. Sarah's calls and texts, initially a barrage of angry accusations and tearful apologies, slowly dwindled. Life began to settle into a new rhythm, a quiet hum of work, mittens, and the occasional dinner with friends. I even started dating again, cautiously, tentatively. Mark was kind, intelligent, and, most importantly, loved animals. He found my story about Sarah and Mittens both shocking and endearing, a testament to my fierce loyalty. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I'd made the right choice. Then came the first twist, subtle at first, a whisper in the wind. I started receiving anonymous emails, short, cryptic messages hinting at secrets, at betrayals far deeper than Sarah's recent transgressions. They spoke of a past I barely remembered, a childhood shrouded in a haze of selective memory. "Your sister isn't the only one with secrets," one email read. "The truth about your family is far more disturbing than you can imagine." I dismissed them as Sarah's pathetic attempts at revenge, a desperate ploy to destabilize me. But a seed of doubt had been planted. The emails grew more frequent, more specific. They mentioned names I hadn't heard in years, events I'd long suppressed. One email in particular sent a shiver down my spine. It spoke of a summer when I was 10, a trip to our grandparents' farm and an accident involving a well. I remember the trip, the heat, the smell of hay, but the accident, it was a blank. I'd always been told I fell and hit my head, a minor concussion. But the email suggested something far more sinister, a cover-up, a deliberate act of deception. I tried to confront Sarah, but she was unreachable. Aunt Carol, when I finally got through to her, was evasive. "Sarah's going through a lot right now, honey," she'd said, her voice unusually strained. "Just give her some space." The more I pressed, the more she shut down, her usual no-nonsense demeanor replaced by a nervous flutter. It was clear she was hiding something. My research began subtly. I started digging through old family photos, looking for clues, for anything that might jog my memory. I found pictures of that summer, of Sarah and me smiling, carefree. But in one photo, taken near the old well, Sarah's smile seemed forced, her eyes wide with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. Fear? Guilt? I couldn't tell. The more I looked, the more questions arose. Why was I always the one who got sick after those summer visits? Why did my parents always seem so relieved when we returned home? The second twist hit me like a punch to the gut. I was at my parents' house for a holiday dinner, a tense affair made even more awkward by Sarah's absence. Mom, after a few glasses of wine, started reminiscing about our childhood. She mentioned the well incident, casually, as if it were a fond memory. "You were such a clumsy child, Olivia." She'd chuckled, ruffling my hair, "Always falling and bumping your head." But then, a slip of the tongue. "It was a good thing Sarah was there to pull you out, wasn't it?" My blood ran cold. Sarah? Pull me out? I'd always been told I was alone, that I'd managed to climb out myself. I looked at my dad, his face a mask of carefully constructed indifference. He cleared his throat, changed the subject, but the damage was done. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and meaningless, began to click into place. The anonymous emails, Sarah's strange behavior, my parents' evasiveness, it all pointed to a truth I was terrified to uncover. I confronted my parents that night, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. They denied everything, of course, their denials growing more frantic with each question. But their eyes, usually so open and loving, now held a flicker of something dark, something I couldn't quite place. It was the look of people guarding a terrible secret, a secret that had festered for years, poisoning our family from within. I left their house that night feeling utterly alone, the warmth of their home replaced by a chilling sense of betrayal. My entire childhood and every memory, every shared laugh now felt tainted, a carefully constructed lie. I drove back to Chicago, the city lights blurring through my tear-filled eyes. The image of Sarah's forced smile near the well burned into my mind. What had really happened that summer? And why were they all so desperate to keep it hidden? My investigation intensified. I hired a private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop named Frank, who specialized in cold cases. He was expensive, but I was desperate. And I gave him all the information I had, the anonymous emails, the cryptic hints, the unsettling memory of my mother's slip of the tongue. He listened patiently, his eyes shrewd and knowing, then nodded. "Sounds like a family secret, all right," he'd said, his voice gravelly. "And those are always the nastiest." Frank's initial findings were unsettling. He discovered that our grandparents' farm had been sold shortly after that summer, quickly and quietly, to a developer who raised the property to build a new subdivision. The well, he confirmed, had been filled in, its existence erased from public record. It was a detail that seemed insignificant at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it screamed cover-up. Why go to such lengths to erase a simple accident? Then came the third twist, the one that shattered my world into a million pieces. Frank found an old newspaper clipping, buried deep in the archives of the local library. It was a small article tucked away on an inside page, reporting the disappearance of a young girl from a neighboring farm, just a few miles from my grandparents' property. The date of her disappearance? The same summer I had supposedly fallen into the well. The article mentioned a search, a frantic effort by the community, but the girl was never found. Her name was Emily. My heart pounded in my chest. Emily. The name echoed in my mind, a faint, unsettling whisper from a forgotten past. Could it be connected? Could my accident and Emily's disappearance be more than just a coincidence? The thought was horrifying, but it fit. It explained the secrecy, the evasiveness, the desperate need to bury the past. My family wasn't just hiding a secret, they were hiding a crime. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My sister, my parents, my entire family, were they capable of such a thing? The innocent memories of my childhood, once a source of comfort, now felt like a cruel deception. I looked at Mittens, curled up peacefully on my bed, and a fresh wave of anger surged through me. Sarah's petty cruelty, her disregard for life, suddenly seemed like a symptom of a deeper, more insidious rot within our family. If they could cover up a disappearance, what else were they capable of? I called Frank, my voice barely a whisper. "Emily," I said, the name feeling foreign on my tongue. "Find out everything you can about Emily." He listened, his silence a testament to the gravity of my request. He knew, as I did, that we were treading on dangerous ground. This wasn't just about a family secret anymore, it was about justice, about uncovering a truth that had been buried for decades. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and frantic research. I delved into online forums, cold case websites, anything that might shed light on Emily's disappearance. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that my family was involved. The details of the case, the lack of leads, the sudden sale of the farm all pointed to a carefully orchestrated cover-up. I felt a growing sense of dread, a chilling realization that the people I loved, the people who were supposed to protect me, were capable of unimaginable darkness. It's strange how these dark family secrets connect us. If this story is getting under your skin, subscribe for more real family exposés. My relationship with Mark, once a source of comfort, began to fray under the strain. I was distant, preoccupied, haunted by the ghosts of the past. He tried to understand, to offer support, but how could he? How could anyone comprehend the horror of discovering your entire life was built on a foundation of lies? I pushed him away, isolating myself in my desperate quest for the truth. I knew I was risking everything, my relationships, my career, my sanity, but I couldn't stop. The truth, no matter how painful, had to be unearthed. The memory of Emily, a young girl lost and forgotten, demanded it. And I, Olivia, was going to be the one to find it. Frank's investigation into Emily's disappearance yielded a chilling portrait of a small town's complicity. The official report was sparse, a few lines about a runaway, quickly closed. But Frank, with his years of experience sniffing out lies, saw the gaps, the hurried conclusions. He found whispers in old police logs, hushed conversations recorded in dusty town council minutes. The local sheriff at the time, a man named Jedediah Stone, had been a close friend of my grandfather. The pieces were beginning to form a grotesque mosaic. I started visiting the old farm, now a sprawling suburban development. The well was gone, paved over, but the land still held echoes of its past. I walked the manicured lawns, trying to imagine Emily, a girl my age, playing in these fields, her laughter carried on the wind. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I felt her presence, a faint whisper of injustice, urging me on. My parents, meanwhile, became increasingly agitated. They noticed my late-night calls, my distracted demeanor. My mother, usually so composed, started snapping at my father, her nerves frayed. One evening, I overheard them arguing in hushed tones. "She's getting too close, Robert," my mother hissed, her voice trembling. "We need to stop her." My father's reply was a low growl, something about protecting the family, about keeping the past buried. The conversation confirmed my worst fears. They were not just complicit, they were actively involved. The emotional toll was immense. I found myself staring at Mittens for hours, his innocent gaze a stark contrast to the darkness swirling within me. He was my anchor, the one pure thing in a world that was rapidly turning ugly. I clung to him, his soft purrs a fragile comfort against the rising tide of despair. Mark tried to reach out, but I pushed him away, unable to burden him with the monstrous truth I was uncovering. How could I explain that my family, the people who raised me, might be murderers? Frank's next discovery was a bombshell. He found an old diary, hidden in the attic of a distant relative who had recently passed away. It belonged to my grandmother. The entries were cryptic at first, mundane observations about farm life, the weather, the price of crops. But then, the tone shifted. There were mentions of a troublesome girl, a mistake that needed to be handled. And then a chilling entry, the well. "It's done. Robert handled it. Sarah saw too much. Sarah saw too much." The words echoed in my mind, a terrifying revelation. My sister, the one I had dismissed as petty and cruel, was not just a witness. She was a victim of their manipulation, forced to carry the burden of their secret. Her erratic behavior, her desperate need for attention, her inability to form lasting relationships, it all made sense. She wasn't just a spoiled brat. She was a traumatized child, silenced by a family determined to protect its dark secrets. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Anger at my parents for their monstrous deception, pity for Sarah, and a burning desire for justice. I had to find Sarah, to talk to her, to understand what she had seen. She was the key, the missing piece of the puzzle. I called Aunt Carol, my voice firm, demanding to speak to my sister. Aunt Carol, after a moment of hesitation, gave me Sarah's new address, a small apartment in a run-down part of town. "She's not doing well, Olivia," she warned. "Be gentle." I found Sarah in a state of disarray, her apartment a reflection of her inner turmoil. Empty takeout containers littered the floor, clothes were strewn everywhere, and the air hung heavy with the scent of stale cigarettes. She looked gaunt, her eyes hollow, a shadow of the vibrant, if troublesome, girl I remembered. When she saw me, her face contorted into a mixture of fear and resentment. "What do you want?" she snarled, her voice hoarse. "I know about Emily," I said. my voice soft but steady. "And I know you saw something." Her eyes widened, a flicker of terror in their depths. She tried to deny it, to push me away, but I persisted, gently, patiently. I told her about the diary, about Frank's investigation, about the web of lies our parents had woven. Slowly, hesitantly, the dam broke. Tears streamed down her face as she recounted the horror of that summer day, the day she saw our grandfather, with our father's help, dispose of Emily's body in the well. Emily, a runaway from an abusive home, had sought refuge at our grandparents' farm, only to be silenced when she threatened to expose a dark family secret, a secret Sarah couldn't bring herself to articulate, only hinting at something unspeakable, something that involved our grandfather's predatory nature. Sarah had been a terrified child, threatened into silence, forced to witness a crime that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Our parents, desperate to protect their family's reputation, had orchestrated the cover-up, bribing the sheriff, selling the farm, erasing every trace of Emily's existence. They had sacrificed Sarah's innocence, her mental well-being, all to preserve their carefully constructed facade of respectability. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My family wasn't just flawed, they were monsters. It's strange how these dark family secrets connect us. If this story is getting under your skin, subscribe for more real family exposés. I held Sarah as she sobbed, her body racked with years of suppressed grief and guilt. In that moment, the petty grievances, the cat, the arguments, they all faded into insignificance. All that mattered was the broken girl in my arms, a victim of our family's monstrous secret. We were both victims, bound by a shared trauma, a legacy of lies. But now, armed with the truth, we had a choice. We could continue to live in the shadows, or we could fight for justice, for Emily, and for ourselves. The path ahead would be fraught with danger, but for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of purpose, a burning resolve to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The confession from Sarah was a torrent, a dam breaking after decades of pressure. She spoke of the fear, the threats, the chilling silence that followed Emily's disappearance. Our grandfather, a man I remembered as kind and jovial, was painted as a predator, his charm a veneer over a dark, manipulative core. My father, his dutiful son, had been his enforcer, a silent accomplice in the horrific act. And my mother, the loving matriarch, had been the architect of the cover-up, her fierce protectiveness twisted into something monstrous. Sarah's story was a jigsaw puzzle, each piece fitting perfectly into the gaps of my own fragmented memories. The accident at the well, my parents' strange evasiveness, the hurried sale of the farm, it all coalesced into a horrifying tableau. Emily hadn't just disappeared, she had been silenced, her young life extinguished to protect a family's dark secret. And Sarah, a child herself, had been forced to bear witness, her innocence shattered, her spirit scarred. Our reunion, born of shared trauma, was fragile but potent. The years of resentment, the petty squabbles, the cat incident, they all seemed trivial in the face of this monumental truth. We were no longer just sisters, we were co-conspirators in a quest for justice, two broken pieces of a shattered family, trying to put ourselves back together. Sarah, once a source of endless frustration, now became my confidant, her vulnerability a stark contrast to her previous defiance. She was still fragile, prone to panic attacks and fits of despair, but there was a new strength in her, a quiet determination to see this through. Mark, to my surprise, didn't abandon me. When I finally confided in him, pouring out the horrifying tale, he listened with a quiet intensity, his hand gripping mine. He didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. Instead, he offered unwavering support, a steady presence in the swirling chaos of my life. He helped me research legal avenues, connected me with a lawyer specializing in cold cases, and even offered to pay for some of Frank's escalating fees. His love, once a quiet comfort, now became a lifeline. Frank, meanwhile, was relentless. He dug deeper, unearthing old police reports, interviewing retired officers, and even tracking down distant relatives of Emily's who had long given up hope. He found evidence of a pattern: other young women in the area who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, their cases dismissed as runaways or suicides. The picture that emerged was far more sinister than I could have imagined. A predatory grandfather, a complicit father, and a small town willing to turn a blind eye. The pressure on my parents intensified. They sensed my growing resolve, the shift in my demeanor. My mother's calls became less frequent, her voice laced with a desperate plea for me to let sleeping dogs lie. My father, usually so stoic, began to show cracks in his facade. I saw him pacing the house late at night, his face etched with worry, his once commanding presence diminished by the weight of his guilt. The carefully constructed world they had built was crumbling around them, and I was the one holding the hammer. Sarah and I spent hours poring over Frank's findings, each new piece of information a fresh wound, a confirmation of our family's depravity. We found old letters from Emily's parents, desperate pleas for information, their grief palpable even across the decades. We saw photos of Emily, a bright-eyed girl with a hopeful smile, her future stolen by the very people who were supposed to be pillars of the community. The injustice of it all fueled our resolve, transforming our pain into a burning desire for retribution. One evening, as we sat in my apartment, surrounded by stacks of documents and old photographs, Sarah broke down. "I can't do this, Olivia," she sobbed, her voice raw with despair. "It's too much. I just want to forget." I held her, stroking her hair, my own heart aching with the weight of her pain. I knew how she felt. There were moments when I wanted to run, to bury my head in the sand, to pretend none of this was real. But I couldn't. Emily deserved justice, and Sarah, my broken sister, deserved peace. "We're in this together, Sarah," I whispered, my voice firm. "We owe it to Emily. We owe it to ourselves." She looked up, her eyes red and swollen, but there was a flicker of determination in their depths. We were a team, two sisters united by a shared horror, ready to face the darkness that had consumed our family for so long. Our parents, sensing the inevitable, made a desperate attempt to salvage their reputation. They offered Sarah money, a substantial sum, to keep silent, to disappear, to forget everything she had seen. They tried to appeal to my sense of family loyalty, reminding me of all they had sacrificed for me, all the opportunities they had provided. But their words rang hollow, their pleas a desperate attempt to cling to a past that was already crumbling. Their love, once a source of comfort, now felt like a cage, a tool of manipulation. I remembered the countless times my mother had told me, "Family always comes first, Olivia." But what kind of family was this? A family built on lies, on violence, on the silencing of innocent lives? My loyalty, once absolute, had been irrevocably shattered. The truth, no matter how painful, was the only path forward, and I was determined to walk it, even if it meant tearing my family apart. It's strange how these dark family secrets connect us. If this story is getting under your skin, subscribe for more real family exposés. We continued to gather evidence, building a case that was undeniable. Frank found a witness, an elderly woman who had lived near the farm and remembered seeing my grandfather and father burying something near the well that summer. Her testimony, combined with Sarah's confession and the diary entries, formed a powerful indictment. The net was closing in. The truth, like a relentless tide, was rising, threatening to engulf everyone in its path. And I, Olivia, was ready to watch it all unfold, knowing that sometimes the only way to heal is to expose the deepest wounds. The weight of the truth, once a crushing burden, had transformed into a formidable weapon. Sarah and I, once estranged, now moved with a synchronized purpose, driven by the ghost of Emily and the burning desire for justice. Our lawyer, a sharp, tenacious woman named Ms. Albright, was preparing our case, meticulously piecing together the fragments of evidence Frank had unearthed. The old woman's testimony, Sarah's harrowing account, the grandmother's diary. It all painted a damning picture. My parents, however, were not going down without a fight. They hired a high-powered legal team, their resources seemingly endless. They launched a smear campaign against Sarah, painting her as a troubled, vindictive liar, fueled by jealousy and a desire for revenge. They even tried to discredit Frank, digging into his past, looking for any skeletons they could rattle. The battle lines were drawn, and the war for truth was about to begin. The media, sensing a sensational story, began to circle. Local news outlets picked up on the whispers, the rumors of a decades-old disappearance, a prominent family embroiled in scandal. I received calls from reporters, their voices eager, their questions probing. I remained silent, following Miss Albright's advice, but the pressure was immense. Every glance, every hushed conversation felt like an accusation. Mark, ever the steadfast presence, became my rock. He shielded me from the relentless media, offering a quiet sanctuary in the storm. He cooked me meals, listened to my fears, and reminded me of the strength I possessed. His unwavering belief in me, even when I doubted myself, was a constant source of comfort. I realized then that I hadn't pushed him away. I had pushed him closer, forging a bond that was stronger than any family tie. Sarah, despite the relentless attacks from our parents' legal team, held firm. She attended therapy sessions, slowly unraveling the years of trauma, finding her voice amidst the wreckage of her past. She even started volunteering at an animal shelter, a quiet act of redemption, a testament to her growing empathy. The girl who had once thrown my cat out was now a fierce advocate for the voiceless. Her transformation, a beacon of hope in the darkness. The turning point came during a preliminary hearing. Miss Albright, with Sarah by her side, presented our case with a quiet dignity that belied its explosive content. She laid out the evidence, the diary entries, the old woman's testimony, the inconsistencies in the original police report. She spoke of Emily, a forgotten victim, and of Sarah, a child forced into silence. The courtroom was hushed, the air thick with anticipation. Then, Miss Albright called my mother to the stand. My mother, usually so poised, looked frail, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Miss Albright questioned her about the summer of Emily's disappearance, about the sale of the farm, about the well. My mother denied everything, her voice trembling, her denials growing more desperate with each question. But her eyes, those same eyes that had once held a flicker of darkness, now held a raw, naked fear. Miss Albright then produced a faded photograph, an old snapshot of my mother, my father, and my grandfather standing near the well, a shovel leaning against its stone rim. In the background, barely visible, was a small, dark bundle. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The courtroom erupted in a flurry of whispers. The photograph, a silent witness from the past, spoke volumes. My father, unable to bear the weight of the truth, suddenly stood up, his face ashen. It was an accident. She fell. We panicked. He looked at my mother, his eyes pleading, then at Sarah, a flicker of shame in their depths. The confession, raw and unplanned, hung in the air, a devastating blow to their carefully constructed facade. This moment shattered everything I knew. If you're feeling this shock too, hit like. It helps uncover more hidden family truths. The courtroom descended into chaos. Reporters scrambled for their phones, lawyers whispered frantically, and the judge pounded his gavel, trying to restore order. But the truth was out. The carefully guarded secret, the monstrous lie that had haunted our family for decades, had finally been exposed. My parents, once pillars of the community, were now exposed as complicit in a decades-old crime. And I, Olivia, stood in the center of it all. A witness to the unraveling of my own history, the architect of my family's downfall. The path to justice was still long, but the first, most crucial step had been taken. The truth, once buried, had finally seen the light of day. The courtroom was a crucible, forging truth from the fires of deceit. My father's impromptu confession had ripped open the carefully constructed facade of our family, exposing the raw, festering wound beneath. The media frenzy intensified, reporters swarming like vultures, eager to feast on the scandal of a prominent family's downfall. My parents, once revered figures in our small community, were now pariahs, their names synonymous with a decades-old crime. Ms. Albright, seizing the momentum, moved for an immediate grand jury indictment. The evidence, she argued, was overwhelming. Sarah's eyewitness account, the grandmother's diary, the old woman's testimony, and now, my father's own admission. The judge, a stern, unyielding man, agreed. The wheels of justice, slow and deliberate, had finally begun to turn. My mother, however, remained defiant. She refused to acknowledge my father's confession, clinging to a narrative of accidental death and a panicked cover-up. Her eyes, once filled with a desperate fear, now held a cold, calculating glint. She was a woman cornered, ready to fight to the bitter end, even if it meant sacrificing her own children. The tension between Sarah and me, once eased by our shared purpose, began to resurface. Sarah, fragile and vulnerable, struggled with the public scrutiny, the constant reminders of her traumatic past. She lashed out, her anger a shield against the pain, accusing me of tearing our family apart, of reveling in their downfall. I understood her pain, her confusion, but I couldn't waver. Emily deserved justice, and our family, however broken, needed to confront its demons. Mark, my steadfast anchor, became a target of my mother's venom. She saw him as an outsider, a manipulator, the one who had poisoned my mind against my own flesh and blood. She called him, threatened him, even tried to bribe him to leave me. But Mark, with a quiet strength that continually surprised me, stood firm. "I love Olivia," he told her, his voice calm and unwavering, "and I believe in her." "You can't buy that." The grand jury proceedings were a blur of legal jargon, emotional testimonies, and chilling revelations. Sarah, despite her fear, took the stand, her voice trembling but clear as she recounted the horror of that summer day. She described seeing our grandfather, his face contorted with rage, dragging Emily's lifeless body towards the well. She described our father, his eyes wide with terror, helping to dispose of the body, his hands stained with an innocent girl's blood. And she described our mother, her face a mask of grim determination, orchestrating the cover-up, silencing anyone who dared to speak. My mother, when it was her turn, painted a picture of a distraught family trying to protect their daughter from the trauma of witnessing an accident. She claimed Emily had fallen, that my father had tried to save her, but it was too late. She accused Sarah of fabricating this story, of being mentally unstable, of seeking revenge for past grievances. Her performance was masterful, a chilling display of calculated deception. But then, Miss Albright produced a final, devastating piece of evidence. It was a letter written by my grandmother to a close friend discovered in a hidden compartment of the old diary. The letter, dated just weeks after Emily's disappearance, spoke of a terrible secret, a curse that had befallen their family. It detailed my grandfather's predatory nature, his history of preying on vulnerable young women, and the lengths my parents had gone to protect him, to maintain the family's pristine image. It spoke of Emily not as an accident, but as a victim, silenced to prevent her from exposing the truth. The letter also contained a shocking revelation, a game changer that recontextualized everything. My grandmother confessed that Emily was not just a runaway. She was my grandfather's illegitimate daughter, a product of his illicit affair with a local farmhand. Emily had come to the farm seeking her father, hoping for a connection, only to be met with violence and ultimately death at the hands of the very man who had fathered her. My mother, in her desperate attempt to protect her husband and her family's reputation, had not only covered up a murder, but had also concealed the truth of Emily's parentage. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, and the frantic clicking of cameras filled the air. My mother, her face drained of all color, stared at the letter, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into dust. My father, his head in his hands, sobbed uncontrollably. The truth, raw and brutal, had finally been laid bare. In that moment, a profound shift occurred within me. The anger, the resentment, the burning desire for retribution, it all coalesced into a singular, unwavering resolve. This wasn't just about justice for Emily, it was about breaking the cycle of deceit, about reclaiming our family's narrative from the clutches of lies. I looked at Sarah, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. We were not just sisters, we were survivors bound by a shared legacy of trauma, but also by a newfound strength. My mother, seeing her carefully constructed world collapse around her, lashed out. Her eyes, once cold, now burned with a desperate fury. "You did this," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You destroyed everything. You chose a cat over your family, and now you've chosen a dead girl over your own mother." Her words, meant to wound, instead solidified my resolve. Her desperation was a testament to the power of the truth, a testament to the fact that I had done the right thing. I stepped forward, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the chaos of the courtroom. "No, Mom," I said, my gaze unwavering. "You destroyed everything. You chose to protect a monster over an innocent girl. You chose lies over truth. And you forced Sarah to live with that burden for decades. This isn't about a cat or a dead girl. This is about justice. And it's about finally breaking free from the darkness you created." My words hung in the air, a declaration of independence, a severing of the toxic ties that had bound me to their lies. My mother recoiled, her face a mask of disbelief, her power over me shattered. In that moment, I realized my own transformation. I was no longer the timid girl who had allowed her sister to walk all over her, nor the vengeful daughter seeking retribution. I was a woman who had faced the darkest corners of her family's past and emerged stronger, clearer, and utterly unafraid. The grand jury returned an indictment against my father and grandfather for murder, and against my mother for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. The news sent shockwaves through the community, a testament to the power of truth, however long it takes to surface. The path ahead would be long, filled with legal battles and emotional turmoil, but for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. The truth, like a cleansing fire, had burned away the lies, leaving behind a foundation of honesty, however painful. This moment shattered everything I knew. If you're feeling this shock too, hit like. It helps uncover more hidden family truths. Sarah, her face streaked with tears, reached for my hand. Her grip was firm, a silent promise of solidarity. We had walked through hell, but we had walked through it together. The weight of the past was still heavy, but now we carried it together, two sisters, no longer victims, but warriors for truth. The battle was far from over, but the most crucial victory had been won. The truth had been unveiled, and the monsters of our past had finally been brought into the light. And in that light, we found a glimmer of hope, a promise of healing, and the possibility of a future free from the shadows of deceit. The aftermath and the dawn of a new truth. The grand jury indictment was just the beginning. The trial that followed was a grueling spectacle, a public dissection of our family's darkest secrets. My father, Robert, and my grandfather, Arthur, faced charges of murder, while my mother, Eleanor, was indicted for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. The media circus was relentless, our faces plastered across every news channel, our story dissected in tabloids and true crime podcasts. It was a painful, humiliating process, but also a necessary one.